Hello, and welcome back to Think Yourself Healthy podcast. I'm your host, Heather Barbieri. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to remind you that if you take a screenshot that you're listening and tag us on Instagram, we'll send you a 15% off discount for the 8-week Retrain Your Brain program. Just take a screenshot and tag me at Heather Barbieri RDN. Thanks for listening, and let's get right to it. Hello, everybody. On today's episode of Think Yourself Healthy, we have special guest, Jeff Chilton. He is a ethno-mycology specialist. I'm really excited to have you here today, Jeff, to talk about all things mushrooms. So can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them what qualifies you to speak about this?
Sure. Well, I was born in the Pacific Northwest, grew up in Seattle. What are we known for here? Lots of rain. What that means is we have really the perfect climate for mushrooms and other fungi. So mushrooms were all around me growing up. I was able to get out and do wild mushroom hunting, which is really fun because it's like a treasure hunt. You find an edible mushroom and you're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Plus you're out walking around in the woods. It's a wonderful thing. I went to university at University of Washinton. This was in the late 60s. My field of study in university was actually anthropology, but we had a mycology department there. Mycology is the study of fungi, so I took courses in mycology as well. I put the two together because there was no department of ethno-mycology. So I put the two together, and because anthropology is the study of different ways that people relate to the world. So I looked at the use of mushrooms for food, in medicinal use, and also in shamanic use. But what do you do after you get out of university and you've got a degree in anthropology? Well, not much. So I went to my mycology professor. I said, I'm really kind of interested in growing mushrooms. And he said, well, you know what? There's a mushroom farm 60 miles down the road in Olympia, Washington. Why don't you go down there and talk to the owner? And I did. I ended up getting a job. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Growing mushrooms. What a cool thing. I was there for the next 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so
wow.
I was
I
was literally living with mushrooms during that period of time. And while I was there as well, I was reading everything I could get my hands on in terms of growing mushrooms, in terms of medicinal properties. So it was just a time for me that, it was total immersion in mushrooms. In the 70s were really kind of an interesting period in that way in so many respects.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking to that, so in the 70s, mushrooms had this momentum, and then they just kind of died, and we didn't hear about them. And more recently, we're starting to hear the emerging research around the benefits of mushroom use. So what happened in that time frame, and how did you stay employed?
Well, listen, during the 60s, as you know, it was a cultural revolution. So we were examining different states of consciousness through the use of LSD, through the use of mushrooms. It was really quite an exciting time. And during the 70s, that carried on. And at that time, for example, if we wanted to learn more about the mushrooms that were growing down in Mexico, which at the time, that was really kind of the focus in a way. Now, I also understood that we had some of these mushrooms growing in the Pacific Northwest, right in Seattle, which was quite interesting. But the focus was going off to some area where mushrooms were actually being used. And this is what was interesting, is that there was a New York banker that had been doing all of this research around the world. His name was R. Gordon Wasson. He published a couple of books on his research, and one of them dealt specifically with mushroom use in Mexico. Can you imagine? This is 1950s, 1960s, and somebody is all of a sudden coming forward and saying, "Oh, guess what? There are actually people in this world that are still using these psychoactive mushrooms in their healing rituals, and the curanderas, the healers." That was just like, because that idea, that knowledge had been lost. Nobody was aware of this going on until he rediscovered it after being alerted to it by a few other botanists who had been down there. So it was huge news, and there was also things going on in the 60s, like, I don't know if you're familiar at all with Carlos Castaneda and the books that he had read, written, and he was talking about his Yaqui guru down in Mexico and the use of certain plants, whether it be peyote or mushrooms or so on. So it was really a rich period for that kind of information. So there's a lot of people out there that were looking. They were going off to Mexico. I went off to Mexico. I lived there for a year and a half in the early 70s, going back into the mountains, looking for these groups that were using the mushrooms myself when I was in Mexico. So, this was what you could call sort of the looking for Don Juan, who was the Yaqui Indian. And it's still going on today, because people are actually going down to South America, usually on some kind of a tour guided with, some business that's promoting that, and they're going and having an ayahuasca ceremony. And remember, in the 60s, we did not have guides. None. It was simply, we were figuring it out for ourselves. So it was a lot of experimentation going on in ways that today you'd look at and you'd say, well, that's really out of the bounds of how we might look at it today. But we learned a lot, and a lot of information was published due to that. So during the 70s, especially in the Northwest, there was a lot of people interested in the mushrooms. And with a few other people, we actually organized some mushroom conferences that brought in some of these people that were doing all of that research. Now here's what's interesting, is that at that time, all during the 70s, people are looking for these things wild. Okay, they're out there. We're wildcrafting these. We have to go and we have to find them. But I was learning all about mushroom cultivation. I was working in mushroom cultivation. So in 1983, I co-authored a book called The Mushroom Cultivator, which taught people how to grow mushrooms. It was called A Practical Guide to Growing Mushrooms at Home. Now, all of a sudden, and this was through the late 70s and into the 80s, we could cultivate. We didn't have to go to Mexico anymore. We didn't. So even in the Pacific Northwest, where you'd have at times you'd be driving down the road and you'd see people out in the fields with their heads down looking for psilocybin mushrooms.
Wow.
That slowly disappeared, and only a few people carried on with that. But most people went, hey, I can now grow these things. And not only that, all of a sudden you had thousands upon thousands of kilograms of dried psilocybin mushrooms readily available, when before, in the 60s and 70s, not nearly as much. You'd have to go out and find them, or maybe there was a few people growing, but so it changed the dynamic totally. And in a sense, the other thing you have to remember is that the 70s was a period where we really thought prohibition was going to end, because in the 60s they brought in prohibition of cannabis, mushrooms, LSD, all of those things. We thought it was going to end until Ronald Reagan got to be president, and then he had a whole thing of his war on drugs, and Nixon started that,
right.
But I mean he brought it on with this whole thing of just say no.
Yep, I remember. I remember those advertisements on TV.
Yeah, so in a sense, a lot of that got driven underground, because in the 70s we had these conferences, but a lot of this, and even people, you're out there wildcrafting in plain sight these mushrooms. If a cop came along, he could just stop, go out in the field, and arrest you.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it was a period of great change, and that's kind of why, to some degree, you didn't hear as much about mushrooms. But
a lot of the funding got pulled from the universities during that time frame, especially starting with Nixon and going through Reagan. A lot of that funding that the researchers had access to got pulled. It was no longer available, so they couldn't continue to do their research in this field.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. Now, nobody could get a license to do that kind of research anymore. So that really slowed things down.
And in my opinion, and people don't have to agree with me, but I think that this was politically driven in terms of supporting profit for pharmacological, purpose. And
you mean basically pharmaceutical, the pharmaceuticals, big pharma, let's call them.
Big pharma. Yeah, big pharma. In my opinion, I believe that big pharma had a lot to do with pulling out that funding through lobbying and getting, things in order. And so it's really interesting to see, we're having this huge pushback in society now and realizing the negative consequences that are associated with all of the pharmacological medications, the pharmaceuticals that we're so utilizing on a regular basis. I specialize in mental health and substance abuse. And so this is something very, very near and dear to my heart, because I've seen amazing things happen to individuals when they start incorporating the adaptogenic herbs from things such as these mushrooms that we're going to talk about, and also the benefits of this psilocybin. So I have a question. I watched that documentary on Netflix called Fabulous Fungi. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
I am.
Okay. So one thing that really got my attention in that documentary was this idea that the whole fungal organism is a bridge between the animal and the plant world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think what they're referring to is the fact that we share certain attributes with fungi. Look, there's the plant kingdom, there's the animal kingdom, and then the fungal kingdom sits right in between. Now fungi, which interestingly enough, and let me just explain, kind of what we're talking about, which is one part of this really huge kingdom, and that would be what we would call perfect fungi. And, as a mushroom grower, think about this for a second. How do you grow mushrooms? Have you ever been to a mushroom farm?
I have, actually.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And so a small one or a large one? Or?
No, it was just a small one. But yeah, I was able to get exposed to the whole cultivation process and how that all works.
Well, see, here's what's interesting. Mushrooms do not have seeds. So what do we use to start cultivating mushrooms? Well, in nature, and of course mushrooms have spores. These spores float out, they land on the ground, they land on wood, they land on different organic matter, and when conditions are right, these spores will germinate into a very fine filament called a hypha, and then when multiple of those hyphae fuse together, they will form a network, and that network is called mycelium, and mycelium is the actual body of this fungal organism. We call it the vegetative body of the organism, and we normally don't see it because it's embedded in its substrate. The substrate is what it feeds on. So it's underground. We don't see it. It's underground. We don't see it. It's embedded in that piece of wood where a mushroom is growing out of. So when conditions are right, which here in the Pacific Northwest is the fall, it starts to rain. humidity goes up. There's the key. Humidity goes up. They have to have a higher humidity. They don't like dry conditions. They don't grow well in dry conditions. So up goes the humidity, down goes the temperature. Up comes this small little thing that starts really small and then goes through multiple stages to produce this mushroom, what we know as a mushroom. And then that mushroom, as it matures, there's gills underneath, or sometimes there are pores, and in those pores or gills, spores are produced. Out come the spores. Now we've completed the life cycle of this fungal organism. Now, what in the supplement world, we're interested in knowing about, okay, I'm taking the supplement, what part of the plant is it? If it's ginseng, we want the root. If it's echinacea, we want the flowers. If it's ginkgo, we want the leaves. So there are 3 plant parts to this organism. There is mycelium, there are spores, and there is the mushroom itself. And each one of those plant parts has certain, let's just say, benefits, but what's been used traditionally for food, for medicine, has been the mushroom itself, primarily because, look, you can't dig up the mycelium and then gather enough to be useful, right? So it's the mushroom, and the mushroom is actually an amazing biofactory creating all sorts of interesting compounds, and that's what's traditionally used, and that's what in the supplement world we really want to be looking for. Is we want to be looking for a product that is mushroom based and not based on mycelium or anything like that. The mushroom is really the key here to the medicinal benefits.
That's really good to know. That's an interesting distinction, because we're seeing these powdered mushrooms popping up everywhere in terms of, options for supplementation. And I myself got sick September 1st of 2021 with severe COVID, and I ended up developing the long haulers and going into stage 3 kidney failure. So after my kidneys declined significantly, I started looking for adaptogenic alternatives. Let's just call it holistic alternatives. And one of the things that I came across to help improve kidney function were cordyceps. And so I started incorporating cordyceps into my morning adaptogenic beverage. And then from there, I started adding lion's mane to help with some of the chronic fatigue and brain fog that I was experiencing. And then from there, I added in some reishi and then turkey tail. So right now, I feel like I'm pretty covered in terms of the, as many of those adaptogenic mushroom benefits that I can get for my physiological and psychological function. So can we talk a little bit about what are the benefits, and then what kind of things do we need to look for when we are purchasing supplements?
Yeah. Well, before I do, let me just say one thing, because, we kind of started out with the growing mushrooms and how do we grow them and all. What's the seed? The seed for growing mushrooms is actually live mycelium.
Oh, yes.
So we're actually growing out that live mycelium on some kind of a carrier, and that's what we will spread into what we would call the substrate, which is the food that we use to grow a mushroom. So it's really interesting because, no, we're not using a seed, we're not using a spore. We're using the vegetative body of this organism. For those people who are like, oh, mycelium, okay, I sort of get it. But, well, you could think of it in a way as kind of like the root structure, that it's feeding out there and it's sending its nutrients up to this mushroom. And here's the thing about the mycelium, too, that you have to remember is that it can grow out. It can be out there forever as long as there's still a food source. If it grows out and it all of a sudden there's no more food, it stops, it dies. So you have to remember it's not absolutely perennial in any way. But anyway, that's now look, when we want to, for example, and before we get into just benefits and so on, if we want to supplement with mushrooms, first of all, let me just say this. Eat mushrooms. Please put mushrooms into your diet. Mushrooms are what I call the forgotten food. They're the missing dietary link. We talk about fungi. How are they similar to us? Well, what's interesting is the mycelium, when it's growing, it is breathing in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide, just like we do. You see, now that's where they say, we have similarities, right?
Okay, that makes so much sense because it's the opposite of what the plants are doing.
Exactly. It's respirating the same way that we do. The other thing that's interesting is that plants produce starch. That's why we eat a lot of these plants, for the energy that we get from that starch. Now, that can be detrimental sometimes because we eat a potato and all that starch inside, up goes the glucose and down the other side.
Right.
Fungi, mushrooms do not have starch in them. They do not produce starch. You know what they produce? They produce glycogen as their storage carbohydrate. That's what we produce.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
You have these interesting links between humans, or let's just say animals, and fungi. So this is where that kind of all fits together. Now, listen. When we're looking for a supplement, for example, now we look at the plant parts. Okay. We have mushroom, we have mycelium spore. They actually use spores in China. They think reishi spores. They think they have some benefits. I don't, and a lot of science would dispute what they're saying. But that's okay. It's more of a business than anything else. But if we want a supplement, now for one, mycelium. Can we use mycelium as a supplement? Well, in China, they actually produce mycelium in very, very large tanks of liquid. It's called liquid fermentation. And this mycelium definitely has benefits. Mycelium has benefits. One of the things to remember about this fungal organism that we're talking about is that the important compound in it is called a beta-glucan. The beta-glucan is in the cell wall of this mushroom or in the cell wall of this mycelium. So that's the important compound. That's what gives mushrooms their immunological activity. And if there's any one compound that we want to focus on and measure, for example, well, it's the beta-glucan. That gives us a lot of information about a product that we happen to be taking. Now, here's the interesting part, is that if I want to grow mushrooms in North America and use them as supplements, well, here's the issue. I can grow mushrooms for food. I can take my shiitake mushrooms to market. USDA says I'll get $3.50 a pound as a grower as I put them out in the marketplace, and maybe to a store which sells them for God only knows how much, $12 a pound or something.
Yes.
But if I'm selling mushrooms as a supplement, the supplement's not fresh. It's a dried powder. Mushrooms are 90% water. Now, when you dry out that pound of shiitake and you get $3.50, you dry it out, 90% water. Now you have to get $35 for that same pound of mushrooms. So essentially, the economics of using mushrooms in the supplement space do not work. Absolutely. There are no mushrooms grown in the United States that go into supplements, with the exception of maybe like your grower. Maybe he supplies a local herbalist, and maybe he does it, in a way that they trade or they do something, because he's got to get a lot of money. I mean, have you ever gone out and bought some of these specialty mushrooms fresh? I mean, God, if you want fresh shiitake or lion's mane or maitake, it could be $15 a pound for that fresh lion's mane, or more.
I'm here in Southern California, and at the farmers market, I believe that it's somewhere between $17.99 and $21.99 for a pound of that lion's mane.
Okay, dry that out, and now we're talking about around $20 $120 for that fresh or for that dried lion's mane. It doesn't work. So as a commercial mushroom grower from way back, I knew this. So I thought in 1989, I started my company. to sell beneficial or functional mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms into the nutritional supplement industry. I knew I couldn't grow those mushrooms to do it. I went to China. I spent the next 10 years there taking trips, visiting research stations, going to conferences, visiting farms, production factories. And in 1997, I went to China with OCIA, which was one of the major organic certifiers in the U.S. Okay. We did the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China, 1997. Wow. So we grow all of our mushrooms and process them there. Now, but okay, let's get back to the United States now. Let's get back to what's called the mycelium. So a lot of people are going, well, mycelium's got benefits too, so we should use that. No problem if you want to do that. The issue is that in North America, people grow this mycelium on sterilized grain. They then, after a period of 30 to 60 days, they dry it out, grain and all, because you can't separate the mycelium from the grain. They dry it, they grind it to a powder, grain and all, and then they sell it. They call it mushroom.
Oh, mind blown.
Well, and you know, the issue is that what's all the grain doing in there? If you want to sell mycelium, fine. Have 100% pure mycelium. Sell it. It's got benefits. Not as much as the mushroom, but it does have benefits. It has beta-glucans. But why are you leaving the grain in there? Because when we test your product, guess what? It's very low in beta-glucans because of all the grain, and it's very high in what we call alpha-glucan, which is starch. Yeah. So people taking those products are mostly getting grain starch. They don't know it because the label says mushroom, reishi mushroom, shiitake mushroom, and there's a picture of the mushroom on there. They think they're buying a mushroom supplement.
I'm in shock. I have been a fooled consumer. I am so glad that we're having this conversation and being able to kind of dispel this information to help others, because there's been a lot of money on these powders. So let me ask you. Oh
my God. Yes, some of these products are not cheap.
No, so let me ask you this, with this grain that's being added, I mean, in my opinion, this feels like a filler, right? To increase volume weight and be able to keep profit margin.
I consider it not just a filler. I consider it a adulterant because you know. Now look, some of these companies in the fine print of their bottle might say myceliated rice, myceliated oats, myceliated grain of some sort. That's in the fine print. People don't pay attention to that, right? But if you look at their website, what are they talking about? They're talking about mushrooms. So it's very confusing, and people are taking these products. You cannot imagine. We sometimes do a trade show called Paleo FX. Paleo. I've
been there. Oh yeah.
Okay, well, so you know, and if you're into paleo, you're really avoiding grains. And they'll come up to me and they'll say, oh, mushrooms, I love mushrooms. And I'll say, oh, yeah, that's great. And they say, I'm taking a great supplement. I'm like, okay, what's the brand? They'll tell me the brand, and I'll go, I hate to tell you this, but you're mostly consuming grain starch. Oh my God, really? It's and it's that's what it's like. That's what it's really like. And I exposed this. In 2015, I published a white paper called Redefining Medicinal Mushrooms. We have a test. It's called the Megazyme test. We have a test for mushroom beta-glucans, and that test also gives us the amount of alpha-glucan, which are the starches. So with this test, I tested 40 different of those type of products off the internet. I also measured an actual dried mushroom and some of our mushroom extracts. I had 95 different samples that I tested, and what I found was mushrooms have 25 to 60% beta-glucan. 5% or under of alpha glucan, which are the starches, or the glycogen. So, okay, picked up a little bit there. These products that were what we call myceliated grain, they were on average somewhere around 30 to 40% alpha glucan, as high as 60% alpha glucan at time, and the mean average for beta glucan was about 6%.
Oh my gosh.
Some of them had 1% beta glucan, 60% alpha, 1% beta, and it's just like the amount of mycelium in those products was minuscule compared to the amount of grain. And here's what's interesting about it, Heather, is that what is this product that they're making? Actually, what this product is it is a method of manufacturing mushroom spawn. And spawn is what we call the seed, and spawn is basically mycelium, live mycelium on a carrier. One of the major carriers for spawn is grain, because in that gallon of grain you have maybe 3,000 or 4,000 individual grains, and each one of those, when you plant, acts like a little seed, and the mycelium jumps off of that, and they all go out and they colonize the substrate. So they're just using a process that has been in the mushroom industry since the 1930s. They're using that process, but instead they're taking what we would call grain spawn, and they're drying it, grinding to a powder, and calling it a mushroom.
Well, I am very disappointed, but so grateful that you are sharing this information, because this is more vital than ever right now. You know, I personally know how much corruption is in our food industry and our supplement industry, and we consumers just blindly buy, thinking that we're protected, that we're getting the best quality, and unfortunately, we're not. And so this is so enlightening to share with others so that they can really be empowered on how to choose the proper things to get the benefits that we're desiring, the whole purpose of purchasing them.
Absolutely right. And let me just say this as the key. If you're shopping, if it says made in the U.S., forget it. It's one of these products. Yeah. Okay, and turn it over, look in the supplements facts panel. And if in the facts panel it says mycelium, that's what you've got. Even the other ingredients, it says myceliated rice or some other grain, that's what you've got. And you know, you can take it, dump it out of the capsule, taste it. It tastes bland, like flour, grain flour.
Yeah. I'm literally mind blown right now, because I'm thinking about my adaptogenic morning drink and how much starch. No, you're going to listen. This is so I couldn't figure out why I'm burning sugar. I'm like, I should be in carb burn. This does not make any sense to me why I am only burning sugar right now. And you just unlocked the answer. And it's because I'm putting these 4 different powdered mushrooms into my adaptogenic drink in the morning with my MCT oil, and it's negating the whole damn thing.
Well, you know what? And I don't ever mention brands, but after the show we can talk about
that. Yes.
You know, but I don't mention brands. I'm just talking about what's going on out there, because unfortunately the major companies that are producing these products, they have their own retail line, but they also sell this ingredient to other companies who do not know what they're getting. Wow.
So the product that I'm using says it's made in USA. So when you started to uncover that, my brain went, oh shit, I'm just consuming something coming from China. It's just a freaking...
Well, you know what? And look, a lot of people are, you know, we all want to be a locavore. Mm-hmm. We all want to buy products that support our local economies. And a lot of people, too, are like, oh, China, I would not purchase anything from China or anything like that. But look, the United States pours millions of tons of chemicals onto their fruit and produce.
Right.
So, and there are areas, and if you're not buying organic, you're getting all those chemicals. So,
absolutely,
you know, it is like, hey,
And
it doesn't really matter what part of the world. And when we grow our mushrooms, they're back in the mountains in areas, and we test. Before anything leaves China, pesticides, heavy metals, it's got to meet the standards. Once it comes to the United States, we test again. So we've got, we're so deep in testing our products.
That makes me feel a little better, because what I was envisioning were factories filled with mushrooms being cultivated and them using the sewage water as a way, like they do the garlic bulbs, to grow them.
It doesn't work that way, and what I envision, and what I tell people too is, like, would you buy produce that's been produced on the Gulf Coast of the United States, where all the petrochemical companies work? No, of course you wouldn't. Or somewhere where they've got factories that are taking minerals and the chimneys spewing out all sorts of stuff and polluting the ground, and or just the kind of the kind of chemical use. And where did that really begin? In the United States. And we have huge chemical companies that sell these chemicals all over the world. We stopped using DDT back in the 60s because we saw how harmful it was. They still sell DDT to Mexico.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. So in Mexico, they still use DDT on a number of the crops. So you think, well, wouldn't they just stop producing it altogether? No. We're going to keep producing it because we can send it off to the third world, so to speak. And a lot of that just comes right back to us.
Wow.
Just as an example of that, we have this issue with carbon dioxide and so on, and we don't want to burn coal, so we're going to kind of shut down our coal factories. That's great. The problem is U.S. and Canada are still mining it like crazy, and what are they doing? They're shipping it to Asia to let them burn it.
Oh, the systems are so broken. But
oh my God! And the hypocrisy is so deep.
Oh, it is. It's so refreshing to be able to have this conversation and just to have another opinion from another sector of the broken systems to really bring about the awareness of how broken they actually are, right? And if we look at the, as fungus as kind of this bridge between the plants and the animals, we need to fix this system. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
My brain is going in so many different directions. So I'm curious now, because I just canceled my order for the that I literally placed this morning.
Okay.
So now where do I go? What do I do now?
I can discuss that too.
Okay.
Later.
All right. Yeah. Wow. I am just absolutely mind blown right now. So I'm so curious. With the literally, you have blown my mind. I am just literally mind blown right now.
Well, it's too bad you didn't come to our booth at Paleo FX.
No
Then
kidding.
you would have learned that years ago.
Right? No kidding. No kidding. So ultimately, an individual like myself who is really motivated to utilize mushrooms to get their medicinal benefits, where do I start?
Well, you know what? A lot of times people say, well, if you could just take one mushroom, what would it be? And I actually say reishi mushroom. Reishi's very, very high in beta-glucans, one of the highest. It also has these wonderful compounds called triterpenoids. The triterpenoids are very good for liver function. So you're getting the immunological benefits plus more, which sort of separates it from the other species. So in that sense, I would always recommend. Now look, one of the things about reishi mushroom is if you're getting it just like, sometimes you can buy a pouch of the powder, which is fine. You want to stir it into something. Reishi's really bitter. If you have a reishi product and you're uncertain about it, is this really reishi? Dump it out and taste it. If it tastes bland, you're like, this ain't reishi. No, reishi's bitter. It is as bitter as can be. So I would definitely say use reishi mushroom. There are other of these species that are specific. I would say all of these species are good for immunological potentiation, but then you have something like, say, you were saying cordyceps. Okay, cordyceps has been used for fatigue, asthenia. Somebody's been in an illness, maybe like what you're talking about, and they're like, okay, I can't seem to get over this, and it's still lingering. In traditional Chinese medicine, that's where cordyceps would come in. Now, cordyceps is interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the wild-crafted cordyceps, but wild-crafted cordyceps is actually a caterpillar with a little cordyceps growing out of it.
No way.
Yeah. Because this genus of fungi, they attack insects. And so what happens is this caterpillar goes to hibernate in the winter. It digs down under the ground, and while it's sleeping in its hibernation, spores of cordyceps germinate and consume the whole inside of the cordyceps, of the caterpillar. And then in the spring to early summer, up comes this little cordyceps. In China, it's called winter worm summer grass, because the cordyceps looks like a blade of grass, except it's dark. Now, you would never be consuming it. Nobody in North America would be consuming it because it's too expensive.
Okay.
It sells for as much as $15,000 a dried kilogram.
Holy cow!
It's probably the most expensive herb in the world. Now, so in China, really, nobody really purchases it for their own consumption. They might purchase some as a gift to somebody because it's like so expensive and rare. I'm going to give this gift to somebody. But what's happened is that, I tried to introduce it into the supplement market in the early 90s, and I had some people look at it and go, yeah, most of my customers are vegetarian. They're not going to eat caterpillars. So that was the end of that. But what's really interesting is that in the last 10 years, we've learned how to cultivate a species that has been used interchangeably called Cordyceps militaris. It's a beautiful orange-shaped, blade-shaped fungus, and we can cultivate it now. So the price is way down. It's affordable. Cultivation, I love cultivation. I'm a mushroom cultivator. Cultivation is wonderful because you can, in a sense, standardize what you're doing, and you don't have people out there scouring the commons for these valuable products. While they're at it, they are ripping up the soil. They're creating issues. They're even creating divisions among different harvesting groups.
Yep.
Wildcrafting, I do not like, period. There's only one of our species that we wildcraft because it can't be cultivated, and that is the chaga. But otherwise, all of what we do. And so cordyceps is a cultivated product. It's not the caterpillar fungus. And again, it also has a good amount of beta-glucan. So a lot of the research on it has been the effects of the beta-glucans. And the beta-glucans, immunological potential, but that filters out to all parts of us and how our system reacts to things. I mean, whether it's fungal infections or bacterial infections, viral infections. I mean, it's just, so cordyceps, like you said earlier too, is they looked at it as a kidney tonic. So it was definitely tied to the kidneys. So cordyceps is really cool. I think it's a really great species.
Is it an easy one to grow on your own at home?
If you have the right tools, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have the right tools, I should send you a copy of my book.
I would love that. So I'm curious, if a person is interested in wanting to cultivate some of these mushrooms at home, obviously they're going to have to do research and probably get some training to get started, because it's not easy to get those spores going. They're very temperamental, correct?
Well, in fact, what you do, you wouldn't really have to get spores. What you do is a lot of companies out there will be selling spawn.
Okay.
Of these different mushrooms, and there's bound to be companies that would be selling cordyceps spawn.
Okay.
Or if not the spawn, they could sell you what we would consider a culture of live mycelium. But again, it just depends on whether or not you've got the tools you need to utilize that. I mean, it's just like you could buy a kit, and from that kit you could grow these. And you could also, if you had the ability, you could also pull some of the mycelium out of the center of the kit, put it onto a Petri plate, grow it out. Now you've got your own culture of cordyceps. But again, to deal with that, you have to have a certain level of equipment to be able, because it's all sterile culture.
Right. Okay. Wow. So I'm just like, whoa. So, you've discussed reishi, you've discussed the cordyceps. So when it comes to other mushrooms, what are some other really beneficial mushrooms that we can be consuming?
Well, I mean, everybody's sort of heard of lion's mane, right?
Yeah. I love it. For me, it's like having a piece of steak. It's so hearty. It's just
lion's mane is so tasty. Oh my God, it's a delicious mushroom. And this is why I'm always telling people, before you even supplement, put mushrooms into your diet.
Yeah.
Not only are they a wonderful food, I mean, good levels of protein, mostly carbohydrates, but slow-acting, non-starch carbohydrates.
Right.
Mannitol is a primary carb that they have, trehalose, low in fat. When I first went to the mushroom farm, the traditional nutritionists in the United States, 1973, said, "Oh yeah, mushrooms, they're very tasty, but they have no nutritional value." You know why they said that? They said that because mushrooms are low in calories.
Yeah. And that's the thing when it comes to, especially our USDA recommendations in terms of nutritional
the food pyramid.
Needs. Yeah, junk.
Oh, processed foods, right?
Yeah, just eat. I use this my plate back here as an example of how not to eat.
Yeah.
This is not how we want to eat. Like I use this. No. This is what's getting you fat and sick. This is not what is helping you.
Well, you know what? And this is the elephant in the room, isn't it? And this is something that proved out during COVID as well. The people that had the worst time with it were overweight people. Right. And the unfortunate thing is now they're normalizing that as if this is a good thing. Oh, don't say anything about that. Some people are just like that. No, people eat too much. They have a terrible diet. They eat in the middle aisles. They eat all that processed food. Yeah,
and what people don't realize, Jeff, to that point, is that these refined processed foods have a negative impact on the interaction with our microbiome, which is so necessary for every single physiological thing that happens metabolic related.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it literally is doing nothing for your microbiome, but it's probably doing damage to it.
Absolutely.
By all these different things that you're putting into your body. I mean, you just look at some of these products at the list of ingredients and you're just, a perfect example. We have a small little shop here in the small town that I live in that's called Chocolate Tofino. They sell all sorts of chocolate things, but they also sell ice cream. The ice cream that they make maybe has 4 ingredients. But if you ever look at the ice cream list of ingredients in normal ice cream, you're just like, this is not ice cream.
No.
I don't know what it is, but
we have become a chemical-fed society. Bottom line, we have become a chemical-fed society. And unfortunately, these chemicals have addictive properties that they're very aware of the interaction and the, processes that turn on in our brain that contribute to that addiction cycle that we no longer have free will over, because the physiology is determining what the need is. And then it interacts with the microbiome and everything that's happening in our gut. And it's just a negative feedback loop that we can't get out of that is destroying the health.
Absolutely. And what do they want to do now? They're coming out with all of these faux meat products. And you look at those and you go, oh my God, the ingredients that you're putting in, here's another ultra processed food. Some of them they're actually using mushroom mycelium, but it hardly matters if all the rest of the ingredients that you've got in there is just like the processed food company's dream. And I look at those things.
Those are genetically modified, chemical-based options that are absolutely not healthy. If we look at the sodium, if we look at the kind of fat that they're adding into it, it's all the, high inflammatory fats that are creating a lot of free radicals in the body, contributing to disease and destruction of the cell membrane. I mean, we could go on and on, right? Anyone who knows me knows that I am not about this plant-based revolution of synthetic foods that they're trying to force down our throats. And with this food shortage that has been manufactured, they're literally trying to drive us in that direction without any kind of choice.
As if it's not bad enough when you look at all the processed foods out there.
Right. It's really frightening, to be honest with you, at how naive we as consumers have been with just trusting the regulatory processes and what's available to us in the grocery stores. And it's time for us to wake up. It is time for us to wake up and understand that we have a responsibility for our consuming choices that are going to create demand. It's going to create change if enough of us can start taking that responsibility for how we're choosing to put what we're choosing to put in our body and how we're choosing to spend that money.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I totally agree with that. It's like we have the power. Where are you going to spend that money? And the other thing I'd like to just say here, which is something right out of the 60s, which was, and we learned it very early, question authority, period.
Yeah.
Question. Do not take at face value what they're telling us.
Right. And unfortunately, we have gotten to a point now where we're having such significant censorship with the information that is being disseminated amongst the masses that, and this is so funny that you're saying this, because last night I watched a movie with a friend, and it was based on Vietnam and a true story about a guy delivering beer to his friends in Vietnam. And I think it's called like the greatest beer run ever or something.
I think I saw it listed.
Okay. So I'm watching this and I'm like, wow, this is so relevant to what we're going through today in society. The difference is that we didn't have phones and social media and internet to be able to disperse the information. Now we've gotten into a situation where they've created the censorship so the information cannot be dispersed. So we're literally strangleholded, but the technology is working against us in an extremely negative way compared to where we were in the 60s when all of this was happening.
Absolutely right. I mean, I've never seen the censorship as complete as what's going on right now. It's shocking.
Well,
totally shocking.
You know that I'm here in California, and our governor just signed into law that any health professionals who speak against the COVID narrative pushing holistic alternatives can now have their medical and credentials stripped and be held liable.
Yeah.
It's actually criminal. Yeah. They can be criminalized for this now.
Yeah, no, it's shocking. What
does that, tell me what that says to the quality of care that we're going to be getting here in the United States with this kind of.
Well, and the healthcare system in the United States is a travesty. It's a broken system unless you're very rich and you can pay for the best. And then you're like, oh, it's a great system. No, it's a terrible system based on profits, which is why the pharmaceutical companies are so powerful. And then you have these people like your governor who are putting in these policies where, they are essentially throttling people in terms of free speech and a doctor being able to practice medicine the way it should be practiced.
Right. Absolutely. With full consent. Full consent.
Yeah. California's setting a really bad example these days. It's really shocking.
But I understand that they have to take over California because California sets the precedence for what gets accepted throughout the rest of the United States.
Absolutely right. Yeah, it's been that way for quite a while. I mean, it's just been the leader. It was actually the leader in the whole, let's just call it health food or nutritional supplement movement. Right. I mean, California, health, Southern California, it was like they came together.
It's really interesting because there's such a contradiction that's happening here in this state between, being the frontier and pioneers of the plant movement and whole-based eating and, natural foods. And now we've got this whole other system that's completely working against us, and it's negating the both. It's creating such diversion between the two. But more importantly, it's creating so much confusion for the consumer. The consumer has no clue as to where to go from here.
Oh, yeah. Well, and part of that is just the way the information, how they censor it and stuff. So pretty much people are just confounded. Then they just kind of tune out and they just carry on. But right. You want to talk a little bit about psilocybe mushrooms. Maybe we should segue into that.
I would love to, if you have time for that. So I do. So, we've seen this huge surge into the psilocybin movement, especially post-COVID, we've seen huge influxes in this. And so my husband had gotten a planter's wart on the bottom of his foot that he had for about 5 years. And with this planter's wart, he used every holistic modality, shoving garlic up in there, trying to cure it that way, using everything. And so I had suggested to him, have you considered microdosing to get rid of the planter's warts? And he was really skeptical at first. And then he kind of did his research and was like, okay, I think I might be open to this. So he did a 30-day microdosing of psilocybin. And by the end of the 30 days, those planter's warts were completely healed and have not come back. And it's been almost a full 2 years since then. So what's happening here? How is a fungus killing a fungus?
Well, look. You're talking about something that's a pretty unique situation. Nobody's ever used them that way in the past. And look, let me say a couple things about microdosing. Is for one, you have to remember a lot of what we're getting, the feedback we're getting, is anecdotal. And what the whole, and I'm not saying this applies to your husband or not, but the whole thing with the something being either a panacea or something, the effect of believing.
So it's more.
Now maybe he didn't have that, but a lot of people do, and then and I guess what I feel like is, and again, I don't want to speak exactly to him, but we are self-healing if we put our mind to it, and a lot of things. You go to the doctor, he says, "Don't worry about it, you'll be fine." You're going, "Oh, okay." Now you go off and you're fine. Microdosing is one of those things where all they really have right now is anecdotal information. So we don't know what it does. The dose is really small. Could that have an overall effect after time? Maybe. The other thing you have to remember, and maybe I've seen sometimes the protocol where they say do it for 4 days, lay off for 2 or 3, start up again, because you do build up a tolerance. Psilocybin, LSD, these things, you build up a tolerance. So you could be taking it every day, and by the 5th day or something, if you're taking a high amount, you're going like, nothing's really happening now.
Okay.
So we really don't know. It's a phenomena where, unfortunately, right now it's more of a money-making phenomena for a lot of companies. They can put out these small little doses. It's almost like homeopathy. Now, I don't want to tarf homeopathy, but homeopathy is kind of like the opposite of the way I believe, in terms of, I believe, okay, we've got a plant, it's got certain compounds in there, I need to get a certain amount of those to get the benefits. They kind of go in the other direction, and I don't know, but that's the different direction than what I believe in.
Right.
So it's really one of those things where the judgment on this is going to have to come much later. It's an interesting idea that we could take something like that daily, like a vitamin, or like we do right now. I take my specific functional mushrooms daily. I eat mushrooms a lot, but you do that, and I simply believe, because look, if you take a vitamin, like you take a vitamin C, a vitamin D, you're not going to say, "Oh man, I really feel that, it's wonderful." No, you take it because you think this is insurance, this is prevention, this is what we want to do because I believe vitamin D has major benefits to me. So I'm just going to make sure that I get enough of it. And if you're in the northern climes, like I am up in Canada, well, certainly it's pretty important. Mm-hmm. So microdosing, we're going to have to wait to really know if there are true, genuine benefits, or whether it's just one of these phenomena that come along and
has more of like the placebo.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to
the power of belief.
Well, sure, and that's the what do they call? That's the placebo effect, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, that makes sense, and I'm glad that you brought up this fact that you build up a tolerance, because there's a lot of people out there. I've heard, stories of individuals who they're microdosing every day for 6 months straight. And it's like, whoa, I'm not sure that's okay.
Well, yeah, and you know what? We're in a stage now where microdosing is cool.
Right.
So I want to be with the cool crowd. I'm going to microdose too.
Right.
Because I know people who are my peers that have been in this for a long time. They're scientists and so on, and they're just going, you know what? Microdosing is for people that are afraid to take a real dose, because a real dose is life-changing. A real dose is something, and that's why they're using it in all sorts of, whether it be psychotherapy or counseling. That's why they use a significantly high dose. They don't use microdosing. They use a dose because what happens when you are taking a powerful dose is that every cell in your body is lit up. Mm-hmm. and I personally think that experience is one of maybe the most healing experiences you could get out there, to be, what I call dancing to the rhythm of the universe.
Right. Well, in my opinion, with my experiences, it really helps us drop out the ego and kind of step out of our own ways so that we can truly extract what it is that we need in order to facilitate the healing moving forward. So,
well, yes, yes.
When you say a larger dose, are we talking like 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, 5 grams to get that medicinal, or is it kind of dependent upon the person and their sensitivity?
Well, sensitivity certainly plays a role, but interestingly enough, and I know practitioners who use it, what they do is they say, you know what, we don't really take that into consideration. We give everybody the same amount. It's 5 grams, 5 dried grams. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, yeah, because you think, oh, body weight. Here's this, 250-pound man and somebody who weighs 125 pounds. Do you give them the same dose? Well, it's kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
But maybe not. Maybe, yeah, maybe. But so a 5-gram dose is kind of what they have decided upon. And I would say anything from 3 to 5 would probably get you pretty lit up.
So the problem I have is that what I find is I have quite a bit of sensitivity. So if I go more than let's say 2 grams at one time, the mucus that I am producing literally becomes so excessive that I've just got leakage coming out everywhere where it actually impacts my respiratory function. So I have to be really careful with trying to stay in those.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And that's with psilocybe mushrooms.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried LSD?
Oh yeah. Anyone who knows me knows all about my LSD days. So my senior year of high school, I think I probably dropped acid at least 110 times, if not maybe more. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You're of that generation, because when I was in high school, no, that was nothing like that was happening in high school. Yeah. If some of us were actually experimenting occasionally with cannabis, okay, but the whole high school thing didn't really happen until maybe the 70s or something, where people are confronted with that and getting high and doing all that, and it's like, God, I can't even imagine.
No, in the early 90s, I was the total druggie. I was that group of people who, was just completely disassociated and using any kind of substance to numb out and cope with life. And And so for me, LSD, yeah, my days of that are well over. We're good. I don't have any desire. I've also done ayahuasca. And for me, ayahuasca was a life-changing experience. It's a one and done. I don't feel like I ever need to go back to visit. And when I went into ceremony, I was very strategic in terms of the intention that I was setting and what I was hoping to get out of that. And I validated that. And so I feel like
Beautiful.
I'm good. Yeah, it was really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love to hear those kind of stories of kind of life-changing experiences because, you can have those. I mean, you aren't necessarily, people shouldn't build up expectations, but you can have those.
And unfortunately, one of the individuals who was invited to ceremony when I did ended up going into psychosis because they didn't follow the appropriate protocols prior to going into ceremony. Diet is a huge piece of that. And unfortunately, that person went into psychosis and still to this day is in psychosis, which is really, really unfortunate. So can we talk about that? Are you when a person utilizes these medicinal medicines and has a psychosis event, what is actually happening there? Do you know?
Well, no, I don't really know what's happening, but let me just say this is that you can be in a state where what's happening to you is so foreign and without, really maybe the proper attention by attendants, that what happens for what I would call a bad trip is fear.
Okay.
All of a sudden, and back in the 60s, we used to call it a death trip. Because what it's like when you're losing your ego, it feels like you're dying. You think, oh my God, what's happening to me? This is so foreign. This is so what we would call non-ordinary, that I feel like I'm dying. And then all of a sudden your whole body is in this state of absolute terror. And so that it's kind of like the whole thing. The only thing to fear is fear itself. And that's because you have to just let go in these cases. You have to just let it come and not worry about, am I going to get out of it? It's always like, am I going to come out of this? And it's like, yes, of course you are. This is just transitory. You're going to come out of it. Just relax. The Beatles had something. They said, relax your mind, relax your mind, turn off your mind, relax, and flow downstream.
Which most of us can't do, right? And so it's really interesting.
It's very difficult.
It's because it's so counterintuitive. We've got all of these individuals who are suffering with anxiety and depression. They're seeking quick fixes. They want a Band-Aid approach. So they go into a medicinal ceremony and they're not prepared. They aren't ready to truly let go of that fear. And so that promotes the whole bad trip experience, which then can have some negative consequences psychologically for them. So with all of that being said, with the psilocybin, is it possible for it to have negative effects on the liver with chronic use? Like these individuals who are microdosing or someone who is taking a 5-gram dose at one time, can there be negative impacts on liver function?
Well, all I could say is that the shaman, the curandera in Mexico, that is the most famous curandera in the world, her name is Maria Sabina. She was utilizing mushrooms in a regular way for years and years and years and years, high doses. She lived to be 91.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She lived to be 91.
All right.
And look, she lived back in the mountains of Mexico in an area with reasonably poor sanitation, with not central heating in their chilly little casas. No, I mean, she lived under some very difficult living conditions where life expectancy was probably fairly low. So the fact that she was taking these things regularly, probably every week she was taking them, and large doses of them, and healing other people, but she lived to be 91.
Wow. Wow. So really the takeaway is that we have to evaluate the fear that we're coming into the experience with, because ultimately that's going to be a big variable in the kind of experience that we have.
Well, yeah. And look, one of the things that did come out of the 60s was this whole idea of set and setting. Mm-hmm. Setting, where you take them. Is it a safe environment? That's like the Native American church. What happens? They go in, it's a very big teepee or something. There's a fire in the center. Mm-hmm. They all gather around the fire, and they have somebody at the door. You know, it's like you're doing this at home alone or something, and somebody's at the door. Oh my God, who is it?
Right, right.
You know, no, they have somebody at the door. They have somebody tending the fire. Everybody is safe and feeling normal, but you can't. So that's the setting, but you can't go into these things and it's like, oh my God, what's happening right now in my relationship, or this or that, mm-hmm. and go. I'm going to go into this and see if I can't solve it. No. Right. You want to go in when everything is smooth and you feel reasonably good about where you are, your mental space. That's really important. If you go in mm-hmm. with a mental space that's just, the kind of space where you wake up in the middle of the night and that's all you can think about and you can't get back mm-hmm. to sleep and stuff like that. No, you need to be in the proper mental space, the proper physical space to ultimately have a positive experience. Now, that doesn't mean that you always have to, because look, in the 60s, I had a lot of positive experiences, and that wasn't the case necessarily. Right. My mental space was always pretty good, but the setting could be really variable where we were doing it. Yeah. No, trust me, I remember a car ride where six of us were packed in and we headed out to the woods. Oh boy, that was quite an experience. And if they're listening, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and they're laughing right now. Yeah, not only that, going to school, for God's sakes. It's like you're high going to school. I mean, I can't even.
I dropped acid every morning in homeroom, and by 6th hour, when it came to typing, I was seeing tracers, which is why I'm a pecker. I never learned how to appropriately type. Setting
Heather, that's so funny.
So setting that container, right? That's so important. And that's where we're having a lot of irresponsibility that I'm seeing come forward these days in practice, is people are just like throwing mushrooms out there like, oh, you're depressed, you're anxious, here, take this, have fun. So do you recommend individuals do their first medicinal plant ceremony utilizing mushrooms by themselves with some sort of guide, someone who's intentionally setting that container and being a safe space for them to hold for this individual, or more of like a group setting? Is there any particular preference?
Well, I guess it depends on the person. I think, you're talking about sort of optimal mm-hmm. methods of doing it. But, a lot of times what people are doing is they're taking small doses recreationally. They never approach the kind of real experience. So, it's a party drug for a lot of people. And look, mm-hmm. I'm not opposed to recreational use. I'm really not. Mm-hmm. But just like with cannabis, you need to educate people how to use these things. I mean, right. That's the issue in our society, is we don't educate people. We don't have examples of people that mm-hmm. have used this. We need more exampbles like that for people to look up. It's just like alcohol abuse. Right. We haven't been kind of trained or taught. They should have courses on this.
Right.
It's just courses on plant consumption, just like they have courses on diet, things like that. We need that.
Well, and I believe that ultimately with where we're at, we're in a paradigm shift. We're seeing these broken systems start to crumble, and we're seeing new systems start to emerge. And, luckily you and I have been on the frontier of that movement and really trying the best we can for as long as we have been, doing what we love so passionately, which is an exciting place to be. I'd rather be in the forefront than in the back, right? Much rather be the leader of the movement rather than being back there. So It's exciting. I think that there is a lot of hope. And I think that ultimately in the future, we are going to see courses on this, especially as we start to validate the evidence of the benefits from a psychological perspective when it comes to brain function.
I've got a great example for you. Are you familiar with Aldous Huxley?
I am not.
Okay. Aldous Huxley was a very well-known British writer and philosophy, and he wrote a number of books back in the day. One was called Brave New World.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I am familiar with that work.
Okay, the other one that he wrote was called Heaven and Hell, which talked about his mescaline experiences.
Okay.
And then the final book that he wrote, which I recommend to everybody, is called Island. Okay. And in this, he was talking about a idyllic society, kind of a utopian society. And one of the things he did in this book was he said at 18, all of the teenagers went through a ritual initiation based on taking mushrooms.
Oh, wow.
And doing an activity together that knit this group together. But you can imagine, I mean, what if we had initiations like that in our societies?
Oh my God. The intimacy, the dropout of the ego, the compassion that could come in, the love that could be cultivated and carried on.
Well, listen, in this book, and again, it was a subtropical area, he had birds flying around, like you can imagine a parrot flying around. And what the parrot, as it flew around, it would stop, and then it would say, Karuna, Karuna. Karuna means compassion.
Oh, you can't make this shit up. You can't make this shit up.
I highly recommend this book to you and your listeners. Aldous Huxley, Island. It was a classic book. Most of us read it back in the 60s. It was really an important book, and it set up sort of a structure for a model, an example of this is how it could be if we really wanted it.
I'm definitely going to be getting that as soon as we wrap things up today. But my gosh, Jeff, you literally have just been such a breath of fresh air, you know. Really, this has been an incredibly powerful interview for me. I am sure that the listeners, like myself, are really mind blown and definitely rethinking their whole, mushroom adaptogenic approach and what to be looking for and what not to be looking for. I know myself, I'm definitely interested in becoming more hands-on with doing some growing of my own. I think that's something that I would definitely benefit from doing. I'm really trying to transition to being as sustainable as possible. So every little way makes a huge difference.
Right. And I really have enjoyed our conversation, Heather. It's been really great, and you've got great energy, great intellect, and I really appreciate your history and where you've come from and all of this. And I'm happy you're out there spreading your message because it's really important. I mean, it's the whole thing with podcasting is I think it's just a wonderful medium and reaching people and providing them with this type of information.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate your expertise, you sharing your own personal stories. So where can the audience find you? How can they connect with you?
Well, our website is nammex.com, Nammex.com, and we have a menu on the website that says education. Okay. Lots of great information, as well as slideshows that I put together on how we grow our mushrooms, how we process them. It's really interesting. So go there, please. And then we also have a. We can purchase. Well, we're a business to business. Nammex is we sell raw materials, but we have a retail division called Real Mushrooms. Okay. So if you go to realmushrooms.com, that's where you could buy the product. I think you get 25% off the first purchase, and they also have a ton of really great information. You know, so much of what I do is educational. You know, I'm not here to sell products. I'm just here to educate people because I want them to get the best mushroom product available. I want them to understand it. They don't have to buy from us. But be sure you know what you're buying, or you could be buying something that's not even a mushroom. So that's really what my purpose is, to educate people.
I love that. It's very much aligned with my mission as well. And I look forward to potentially collaborating with you again in the future if you're open to that.
That would be excellent.
Thanks for listening to the Think Yourself Healthy podcast. Do me a favor, and if you loved this episode, please go leave a review. Reviews help make sure that this content reaches more people so that we can continue to heal as a collective. Remember to take a screenshot that you're listening and tag us on Instagram at Heather Barbieri RDN for a 15% discount on the Retrain Your Brain program. See you next time.